What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be talking about 5 players that I think are a massive steal in drafts right now. Being an ADP steal to me means you have to be, a discount by a good amount by ADP, and so it's pretty tough to be like a steal in the first couple rounds. Because of that, today no player is going to make it from the top 4 rounds. But who does make the list? I'm going to go over each position, only 4 positions, and so one will have twice, and it'll be wide receiver is going to have 2. So at quarterback, I think fantastic ADP value is Dak Prescott coming off the board as a quarterback 10, my quarterback 7. And as a bonus, he goes in the optimal range we know for drafting quarterback, which is round 6 through 9. So he's in the range where we want to be targeting quarterback, and I really do think quarterback 10 is kind of absurd. Now, I understand people's rationale, I guess, for why he's not as valuable as before. Of course, Amari Cooper no longer with the team. Cedric Wilson no longer with the team. I don't really know if that's going into people's consideration, but I think the general thinking is, yes, they may have brought people in, but they didn't bring people in who are as good as Amari. And so if he doesn't have Amari Cooper, it's going to hurt his upside. That's a very rational take with Dak. But he was the quarterback 2 in 2019. He was first in points per game in 2020 before getting hurt. And then he finished 7th overall, 8th in points per game last season. So a drop down to 10 feels a tad over dramatic to me. We also saw a report recently that said Dallas was intentionally limiting his carries last season, which, is obviously going to impact his value in fantasy. But up through last season, if you look at his career, 69 games throughout his career. If you take those games and you make it on a season-long 17-week pace, on average, before last season, his rushing performances was on average 324 yards, 6 touchdowns across the whole season, which is pretty good. Now, the 6 touchdowns is kind of unique because he's not a hyper-mobile quarterback. But with Dak, we saw it early in his career, like, oh, maybe this will regress. And it really never did until last year. So we kind of can assume he's going to run a few touchdowns in. Again, he's not Lamar Jackson. He's not Kyler Murray. But he's active enough near the goal line. He's good enough on those read options, on those design run plays, where he's going to have rushing touchdowns. And so I don't think it's crazy to think he's going to approach his career average in that area. And the 324 rushing yards, that was way down. 146 and 1 touchdown last season. So I think it's safe to assume that the report is accurate. They're not just making things up, that they were intentionally limiting his carries. And the article also went on to say that they're going to intentionally put them back in this season. So they took him away. He still performed great in fantasy. He was still easily a quarterback 1. They're going to put him back in. Well, he's going to be fantastic. And had he seen just his career average rushing performances last season, that would have bumped him up to 4th overall and 2nd in points per game last year, which means his trailing 3-year numbers would have been 3rd, 1st, and 2nd in points per game. And now you can get him as the quarterback 10 just because they're replacing Amari Cooper and Cedric Wilson with Jalen Tolbert and James Washington. But they're also keeping Lamb, Schultz, Zeke, and Pollard. I think the drop is way too much. Amari Cooper's a good wide receiver, and Amari Cooper really elevates the potential for a quarterback because he can create such explosive plays, but he should not be taking Dak, who has been a consensus top 5 quarterback, and dropping him to 10th. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, especially when we're expecting the rushing to come back, and he already performed better than 10th last season. So really, really, really good value getting Dak at 10. At tight end, big ADP steal is Hayden Hurst, 24th tight end off the board, my tight end 17. This one might not be for those of you who don't like to take any risk. Maybe those of you who, want more assurances. It's tough to say assurances as a tight end 24. I'm really not sure what you're being assured of at that point. But he's a really, really good 2nd tight end, or I suppose in a deeper format, if you waited forever to take a tight end, you're tight end 1. But for the most part, I would say that for those of you, and which is many of you, who like the strategy of taking a mid and a late or just double dipping, taking 2 late tight ends, he's a really, really good 2nd tight end. Now, he's absolutely been a disappointment since the Ravens took him in the 1st round. I think it was late 1st, so it was 25th, 26th overall, somewhere around there. But to be fair, they drafted Mark Andrews that year. And, that's who's been beating him out, or who was beating him out in his first 2 seasons, forced them to trade him to Atlanta. That's tough. How many tight ends would have beat out Mark Andrews? 0, right? Then he had a solid season in Atlanta, commanded 88 targets, 56 receptions, 571 yards, 6 touchdowns. That's a good year. He finished 9th in half PPR scoring. Then the Falcons drafted Kyle Pitts. So we saw Hurst take a backseat again. But that's pretty bad luck for Hurst, right? I mean, they go out, they draft you, and they draft Mark Andrews. So they happen to hit on Mark Andrews in the 3rd round. Then the team you go to after that gets Kyle Pitts. That is really, really unfortunate for him. But the 1 year where he wasn't competing with Kyle Pitts and Mark Andrews, he was a tight end 1. He now joins the Bengals as the very clear top tight end. No disrespect to Drew Sample, but Hurst is, better. He just is. The Athletic also reported that CJ Uzomah's performance last season should kind of be considered the floor for Hurst. And I don't know if I want to go that far and say that that's his floor, but it kind of does make sense. Hurst is a much better receiving threat than Uzomah is, and he just allows them to do a little bit more than Uzomah was able to do. And Uzomah, honestly, he had some really good games last season. He had a really good start to the playoffs before getting hurt. So when they started involving him in the offense, he was pretty good. But at the end of the day, I think the best rationale for saying why he'd be a good late round pick is just at 24, to really outperform the ADP, you need 4 for 40 every week, and then to kind of string together a few touchdowns. And if we're looking at tight ends who can string together a few touchdowns and maybe go to 7, 8 touchdowns on the year, really push their luck, well, we want them on really good offenses. Of course, the Bengals are one of the best offenses in football. It's more difficult for someone on the Jaguars, the Jets, to really post a lucky touchdown season. But on the Bengals, sure, he could absolutely just fall into the end zone more than he would on average. And 4 for 40, if 4 for 40 and a few touchdowns is shattering your ADP, that's not that crazy to think that Hurst can really do that. And also just think about what defenses are doing. Pretend you're the defensive coordinator of a team going up against the Bengals each week, or just next week, let's say. Your first priority is probably Jamar Chase, then probably the ground game and Mixon, especially with their new offensive line being really good. Then you're looking at T. Higgins. Then you're all right, well, let's just make sure Tyler Boyd doesn't rip us apart. Your 5th option is Hurst. You're not even considering him until that late. And so he's never going to be double teamed, obviously, but he's never going to be a primary focus. They're always going to be taking all these other players away. He's going to be running wild in the middle of the field. And that's just a really positive thing for him, to just not be the primary focus on defense, to be of 0 focus, really. The teams will want him to be the one that's the main target on a play. And so at 24, it's a lot of really bad tight ends going in that range. I think it's worth a shot on Hayden Hurst. At wide receiver, remember 2 names. First name up, we'll go by order of ADP, Darnell Mooney, 30th wide receiver off the board. My wide receiver 22. Mooney had a solid rookie season, 61, 631 receiving yards, 4 touchdowns, but he really started to grow in year 2, commanded 140 targets. That's a lot of targets, catches 81 of them, over 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's really good, and that production was enough to have him finish as a wide receiver, 24.5 PPR scoring. But there's reason to be more excited about his potential this season. Not only the fact that wide receivers get better, wide receivers develop, and so entering his 3rd year, that's a very common year for wide receivers to really have a breakout. But Allen Robinson is gone now. And while he didn't have a good year last year, that just really solidifies Mooney as the clear number 1 option in the passing game. His wide receiver competitions, Byron Pringle, Velus, however you say his name, Jones Jr., Equinemius St. Brown. I mean, Cole Kmet is there at tight end, but there's only so many. I like Cole Kmet, but there's only so many targets he can really command. Mooney could very well push 150, 160 targets this year, and we should expect those targets to come with better efficiency this season. Matt Nagy is no longer the head coach, And it just seems like the offense is going to feature a lot more play action passing, which is what I'm excited about. That's something Fields is really good at and they need to do more. And it also fits so perfectly with Mooney's skill set. Mooney is a really good wide receiver overall. He's not like MVS where he can only run deep, but he's excellent at deep routes. He has a really high success rate in that area, but they just didn't push the ball downfield at all really last season. I think people are looking at this offense and they just want to write them off because, well, they were bad last year. And if anything, they got worse talent-wise because Robinson left, but don't underweight the impact that bad coaching can have on an offense. They're going to be better this season, and Mooney is going to benefit from that a lot. And like I said before, he can also just get better as a player. It's not like he peaked as a wide receiver in year 2. Enter year 3, give Fields another season as the starter to really develop in the NFL. This could be a really good combination. Fields, Mooney, Kmet. That's a lot of targets going in that area. And hey, I'm not going to disagree with people who don't think the Bears are going to be a fantastic team. They're going to be playing from behind. They're going to have to throw it. You want Darnell Mooney on your roster. The other wide receiver, if you guys listened to watched the live stream on Tuesday night, you'll probably expect this one coming because I went off on him, and it's Robert Woods. 51st wide receiver off boards, my wide receiver 40. And honestly, there's room to go up from there. Like if he does start climbing ADP, I've got target share to go around. Like I gave it to some players who I don't expect to be that good because there's so much volume expected for this offense. And it's like, where are you putting it? Right? Like they still need to add up to 100% of the targets. And it's Robert Woods. It's a really struggling Treylon Burks. It's, Nick Westbrook-Akine. Like it's trash. I have Austin Hooper for a good amount of targets. Like the targets have to go somewhere. And the reports are that Treylon Burks is really struggling and that Robert Woods is firmly the wide receiver 1. And it's like no one cares. Usually people jump on news over the offseason, at this point in the summer, and they just like start targeting people aggressively on any news. And yet constant reports come out that Robert Woods looks good. Robert Woods would need a setback to not be 100% in week 1. Robert Woods is the clear number 1. Treylon Burks is struggling. Like constant reports suggesting that. And then like no one cares. His ADP stays at 51. I mean, he has at least 5 receptions in each of the last 4 years. He out-targeted Cooper Kupp in 2019 and in 2020. Obviously didn't last season, toward the ACL, but was never going to last season. But, Cooper Kupp was still good in 2019, 2020, and Woods out-targeted him, out-targeted Brandon Cooks. Like, he's just a good wide receiver. And again, the current reports are that he would need a setback to not be 100% in week 1. He has been a top 20 wide receiver in points per game each of the last 4 years, and he's firmly the wide receiver 1 for the Titans. So I wouldn't be shocked if that continues. I would not be shocked if he ends up as a top 20 wide receiver and you can get him as a wide receiver 51. That is absurd value. He's a phenomenal pick. Final player we'll go over today, Melvin Gordon. 35th running back off boards, my running back 30. I had a tough time with running back. Number one, because I didn't really want to go over like the exact same players. I've done running back videos recently. I didn't want to say the exact same names. I wanted to talk about someone new. But also the market is relatively efficient at the running back position. There's no people that are, Robert Woods basically, who are just like crazy undervalued at the running back position. But I do think Melvin Gordon needs a little bit more love. I in no way think he's better than Javonte Williams. I still love Javonte Williams. I still think Javonte Williams is worth an early 3rd round pick. And I don't even think there's a chance that they have a 50-50 workload. But Gordon, he didn't return to Denver to be like moral support for Javonte Williams. He came there to compete for targets, and I do think he's going to get them, or I guess, workload. Not targets necessarily, but touches. He came there to compete for touches. I think he's going to get them. And as much as, again, we know Williams is better, like Gordon clearly still had some left in the tank. Like it was frustrating. We were really on Javonte Williams last season. I knew he was going to be a great running back. He was a great running back. And it was frustrating knowing that like 75% of you probably had him and they just like wouldn't give him the workload. but it wasn't for like no reason, right? Melvin Gordon had more yards per carry last year and the year before than Williams had in his rookie season. Melvin Gordon scored 10 touchdowns each of the last 2 years. He's handled at least 200 touches in every year of his career. Like, he's not a scrub running back. He's a quality running back. And realistically, if you have Williams, you don't want him getting 28, 29 touches a game and then breaking down by week 7. You don't want that happening. You want him to stay healthy because his offense is going to be really, really good. And so you don't need him to have 80% of the workload. You're perfectly fine with 60% because he's still going to be good. And if it's a 60-40 split, like Melvin Gordon is being undervalued. Now, I have him projected for the worst year of his career in terms of touches, 151 carries, 28 receptions. That's 179 touches. It would be his lowest mark by 25, 52 lower than last season. And yet, even with that, I still have him projected to be a value, a really good value as the 35th running back off boards. The offense is going to be good. Gordon is going to have a role. Plus, if you want anything extra, their new head coach was the offensive coordinator for the Packers the last 3 years. He had absolutely no issues splitting the workload between Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. I see no reason why they won't do the same with Melvin Gordon and Williams. Again, this is not saying that Williams is a bad pick. I think he's worth where he's going. But it's not going to be an 80-20 split. And with how good the offense is, there'll be yardage to go around, touches to go around, touchdowns to go around. So Melvin Gordon is being undervalued. I think his ADP is a mistake right now. So those are 5 ADP steals at this point in the offseason. ADPs are obviously going to change throughout the year. So if you always want my up-to-date take, what are the projections saying compared to current ADP, you can always see that by just looking at the website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I'll be back tomorrow to go over the biggest ADP changes this week, and then Monday for another episode of Mock Draft Monday. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.